me know if my heater is causing any. Read. It's here, but the wording is very huge. Start with chapter 4. Remember that yesterday Jackson arrested, pulled over for no license plate and a DN. I don't know. There. Go. Let's take her off. The rear seat was extremely cramped. Of course it would be, Peter thought distractedly. A man that big would have the front seat back as far as it. There were stacks of paper in the footwell behind the driver's seat. The back of the seat was actually warped from the top's weight. And more on the back deck. Peter picked one up. It had a dried coffee ring on it, and saw it was a Dare flyer. The top was a picture of a kid sitting in a doorway. There was a dazed, vacant expression on his face. Morning, how are you? He looked the way Peter felt right now, in fact. So now they're getting into the cop car. And the coffee ring circled his head like a halo. Losers are losers, Boulder said, the Dare program. There was mesh between the front of the car and the back, no handles or window cranks on the. Peter had begun to feel like a character in a movie, one which came most distantly to mind, Midnight Express. And these details only added to that since his best judgment was that he had talked much about too many things already, and it would be well for him and Mary to stay quiet. I'm good. My voice is still bleh, but I'm doing good. Really good. I actually slept. That was nice. I don't usually sleep all night, so. If my heater gets to be too loud, let me know. I got it on so I can hold her than the rest of the house. It would be well for him and Mary to stay quiet, at least until they got to wherever Officer Friendly meant to take them. It was probably good advice, but it was hard advice to follow. Peter found himself with a powerful urge to tell Officer Friendly that a terrible mistake had been made here. He was an assistant professor of English. Specialty was post-war American fiction. He had recently published a scholarly article called James Dickey and the New Southern Reality, piece which had generated a great deal of controversy in certain ivied academic bowers. Boy. Furthermore, that he hadn't smoked dope in years. He wanted to tell the cop that he might be a little undereducated by Central Nevada standards, but was still basically one of the good guys. He looked at Mary. Her eyes were full of tears. He was suddenly ashamed of the way he had been thinking. All me, and I. His wife was in this with him. He'd do well to remember that. Pete, I am so scared, she said in a whisper that was almost like a moan. He leaned forward and kissed her cheek. Skin was as cool as clay beneath his lips. He'll be all right. Straighten this out. Word of honor? Word of honor. After putting them into the back seat of the cruiser, the cop had returned to the Acura. He had been looking into the trunk for at least 2 minutes now, not searching it, not even moving anything around, just staring in with his hands clasped behind his back, as if mesmerized. Now he jerked like a man waking suddenly from a nap. slammed the Acura's trunk shut, and walked back to the Caprice. It canted to the left when he got in. From the springs beneath, there came a tired but somehow resigned groan. The back seat bulged a little further, and Peter grimaced at the sudden pressure on his knees. Mary should have taken his side, he thought. But it was too late now. Too late for a lot of things, actually. The cruiser's engine was running. Pop dropped the transmission into gear and pulled back onto the road. Mary turned to watch the Acura drop behind them. When she faced front again, Peter saw the tears which had been standing in her eyes had spilled down her cheeks. Listen to me, he said, speaking to the cropped blonde hair on the back of that enormous skull. The cop had laid his smoky bear hat aside again, and Peter, the top of his head, looked to be no more than a quarter of an inch from the Caprice's roof. Please, okay? Try to understand. That isn't our car. You have to understand that much at least. I know you do. Because you saw the registration. It's my sister-in-law's. She's a pothead. Half her brain cells. Hair? Peter laid a hand on her arm, shook it off. No, I'm not going to spend the rest of the day answering questions in some dipshit police station, maybe in a jail cell, because your sister's selfish and forgetful and all fucked up. Peter sat back. His knees were still being pinched pretty severely, but he thought he could live with it, and looked out the dust-coated side window. They were a mile or two east of the Acura now, and he could see something up ahead, pulled over on the shoulder of the westbound lane. What sort of vehicle? Big truck, maybe? Mary had switched her gaze from the back of the cop's head to the rearview mirror, trying to make eye contact with him. Oh, wow. She was looking out the rearview mirror, trying to make eye contact with him. Half of Desiree's brain cells were fried, and the other half are permanent vacation in the Emerald City. The technical term is burnout, and I'm sure you've seen people like her, officer, even out here. What you found under the spare tire probably is dope. You're probably right about that. But not our dope. Can't you see that? Thing up ahead, off the road, with its tinted windshield pointed in the direction of Fallon, Carson City, and Lake Tahoe, wasn't a truck after all. It was an RV. Not one of the real dinosaurs, but still pretty big. Cream colored, with a dark green stripe running along the side. The words, "For Happy Wanderers," were painted in the same dark green as the RV's blunt nose. The vehicle was road dusty and canted over in an awkward, unnatural way. As they neared it, Peter saw an odd thing. All the tires, in his view, appeared to be flat. He thought maybe the double seat of the back tires on the passenger side was flat too, although he only caught the briefest glimpse of them. That many flat tires would account for the Land Cruiser's funny, canted look, but how did you get that many flat shoes all at once? Nails in the road? A shroud of glass? A shrew of glass? He looked at Mary, but Mary was still looking passionately up into the rearview mirror. If you'd put that bag of dope under the tire, she was saying, if we'd, she was saying, if it was ours, then why in God's name would Peter have taken the spare out so you could see it? I mean, he could have reached around the spare tire and gotten the toolkit. It would have been a little awkward, but there was room. They went past the RV. The side door was closed, but unlatched. Stairs were down. There was a doll lying in the dirt at the foot of them. The dress it was wearing fluttered in the wind. Peter's eyes closed. He didn't know for sure, if he had closed them or if they had closed on their own. Didn't much care. All he knew was that Officer Friendly had blown by the disabled RV as if he hadn't even seen it, or as if he'd already knew all about it. Words from an old song floated into his head. Something happening here. What is it already? Or what it is ain't exactly clear. Something's happening here. Do we impress you as stupid people? Mary was asking, as the disabled RV began to dwindle behind them. To dwindle as Desiree's Acura had done. Or stoned. Do you think we're... Shut up, Bob said. He spoke softly, but there was no way to miss the venom in his voice. Mary had been sitting forward with her fingers curled into the mesh between the front and back seats. Now her hands dropped away from it, and she turned her shocked face toward Peter. She was a faulty wife. She was a poet who had published in over 20 magazines since her first tentative submissions 8 years ago. She went to a women's discussion group twice a week. She had been seriously considering piercing her nose. Peter wondered when the last time was she had been told to shut up. He wondered if anyone had ever told her to shut up. What? She asked, perhaps trying to sound aggressive, even threatening, and only sounding bewildered. What did you tell me? I'm arresting you and your husband on a charge of possession of marijuana with intent to sell, Pop said. His voice is uninflected, robotic. Now, staring forward, Peter saw there was a little plastic bear stuck to the dashboard, beside the compass and next to what was probably an LED readout for a radar speed gun. The bear was small, the size of a gumball machine prize. His neck was on a spring, and his empty, painted eyes looked back at Peter. This is a nightmare, he thought, knowing it wasn't. It's got to be a nightmare. I know it feels real, but it's got to be. You can't be serious, Mary said. But her voice was tiny and shocked, the voice of someone who knew better. Her eyes were filling up with tears again. Surely you can't be. You have the right to remain silent, the big cop said in his robot's voice. If you do not choose to remain silent, anything you say may be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. I'm going to kill you. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand your rights, as I have explained them to you? She was looking at Peter, her eyes huge and horrified, asking him without speaking if he had heard what the cop had mixed in with the rest of it. That robotic voice, never varying. Peter nodded. He had heard all right. He had a hand on He put a hand into his crotch, sure he would feel dampness there, but he hadn't wet himself, not yet anyway. He put an arm around Mary and could feel her trembling. He kept thinking of the RV back there, door ajar, doll baby laying face down in the dirt, too many flat tires. And then there was the dead cat Mary had seen nailed to the speed limit. Do you understand your rights? Act normally. I don't think he has the slightest idea what he said. Act normally. But what was normal when you were in the back seat of a police cruiser driven by a man who was clearly as mad as the Hatter? A man who had just said he was going to kill you. Do you understand your rights? The robot voice asked him. Peter opened his mouth. Nothing came out but a croak. The cop turned his head then. His face, pinkish with sun, when he had stopped them, had gone pale. His eyes were very large, seeming to bulge out of his face like marbles. He had bitten his lip, like a man trying to suppress some monstrous rage, and blood ran down his chin in a thin stream. Do you understand your rights? The cop screamed at them. Had turned, bulleting blind down the deserted two-lane at better than 70 miles an hour. Do you understand your fucking rights or not? Do you or not? Do you or not? Do you or not? Answer me, you smart New York Jew. I do, Peter cried. We both do. Just watch the road, for Christ's sake. Watch where you're going. The cop continued staring back at them through the mesh, pale pace. Oh my gosh, pale pace. Face pale, blood dripping down from his lower lip. The caprice, which had begun to veer to the left almost all the way across the westbound lane, now slid back the other way. Don't worry about me, the cop said. His voice was mild again. Gosh, no, I've got eyes in the back of my head. In fact, I've got eyes just about everywhere. You'd do well to remember that. He turned back suddenly, facing again front, and dropped the cruiser's speed to an easygoing 55. The seat settled back against Peter's knees with painful weight, pinning him. He took Mary's hands in both of his own. She pressed her face against his chest, and he could feel the sobs as she was trying to suppress. They shook through her like wind. He looked over her shoulder, through the mesh, on the dashboard. Bear's head nodded and bobbed on its spring, like one of those bobbleheads. I see holes like eyes, the cop said. My mind is full of them. He said nothing else until they got to town. Chapter 5. The next 10 minutes were very slow ones for Peter Jackson. The cop's weight against his pinned knees seemed to increase with each circuit of his wristwatch second hand, and his lower legs were soon numb. His feet were dead asleep, and he wasn't sure that he would be able to walk on them if this ride ever ended. His bladder throbbed. His head ached. He understood that he and Mary were in the worst trouble of their lives, but he was unable to comprehend this in a real and meaningful way. Every time he neared comprehension, there was a short circuit in his head. They were on their way back to New York. They were expected. Someone was watering their plants. This couldn't be happening. Absolutely could not. Mary nudged him and pointed out her window. There was a sign, reading simply, Desperation. Under the word was an arrow pointing to the right. The cop slowed, but not much, before making a right. The car started to tip, and Peter saw Mary drawing in breath. She was going to scream. He put his hand over her mouth to stop her and whispered in her ear, He's got it. Pretty sure he does. We're not going to roll. But he wasn't sure until he felt the cruiser's rear and front slide, then catch hold. A moment later, they were racing south along narrow-patched blacktop with no center line. A mile or so further, they passed a sign which read, Desperation's Church and Civic Organizations welcome you. The words church and civic organization were readable, although they had been coated in yellow spray paint. Above them, the same paint, the words dead dogs had been added in ragged caps. The church and civic organizations were listed beneath, but Peter didn't bother to read them. A German shepherd had been hanged from the sign. Its rear paused, tick-tocked back and forth, an inch or two above a patch of ground that was dark and muddy. Mary's hands were clamped on his like a vice. He welcomed their pressure. He leaned toward her again, the sweet smell of her perfume, and the sweet smell of her terrified sweat, leaned toward her until his lips were pressed against the cup of her ear. No word. Don't make a sound, he murmured. Nod your head if you understand me. She nodded against his lips, and Peter straightened up again. They passed a trailer park behind a stake fence. Most of the trailers were small and looked as if they had seen better days. Around the time Cheers first went on the air, perhaps. Dispirited-looking laundry flapped between a few of them in the hot desert wind. In front of one was a sign which read, I'm a gun-toting, Snapple-drinking, Bible-reading, Clinton-bashing son of a bitch. Never mind the dog. Beware of the owner. Actually, great. Who is that? Hello? I know I heard somebody. Figure it out. Who's out there? Oh, can you grab my tea from the fridge? It's on the bottom shelf. I thought you were the boys. I thought you went upstairs. Mounted on an old Airstream, stood near the road, was a large black satellite dish. On the side of it was another sign, white painted metal down, which streaks of rust had run like ancient bloody tears. Thank you. This telecommunications property, Rattlesnake Trailer Park, no trespassing, police patrolled. Huh. Beyond the Rattlesnake Trailer Park was a long, one-set hut with rusty, corrugated sides and roof. Sign out front read Desperation Mining Corp. Yep, Desperation Mining Corp. To one side, the cracked asphalt parking lot with a dozen cars and pickups in it. A moment later, they passed the Desert Rose Cafe. Then they were in the town proper, Desperation, Nevada. Consisted of two streets that crossed at right angles. A blinker light, currently flashing yellow on all four sides, hanged over the intersection, and 2 blocks of business buildings. Most seemed to have false fronts. There was an Owl's Club casino and cafe, a grocery, a laundromat, a bar with a sign in the window reading, "Enjoy your slot hospitality." Gambling. The ghost. I'm wondering, like, if the whole town is ghostly. You know? Something's wrong with that cop, though, I'm telling you. The way he was talking. Hardware and feed stores, a movie theater called the American West, a few others. None of the businesses looked as if they were booming, and the theater had the air of a place that had been closed a long time. A single crooked R hung from its dirty, bashed-in marquee. Going the other way, east and west, were some framed houses and trailers. Nothing seemed to be in motion except for the cruiser and one tumbleweed, which moved down Main in large, lazy lopes. I'd get off the streets too if I saw this guy coming, Peter thought. You'd goddamn tootin' I would. Beyond the town was an enormous curving bulk bulwark bull with an improved dirt road at least 4 lanes wide, running up to the top of a pair of wide switchbacks. The rest of its curved rampart, which had to be at least 300 feet high, was crisscrossed by deep runoff trenches. Peter, they looked like wrinkles in. At the foot of the crater, he assumed it was a crater, the result of some sort of mining operation. Rocks that looked like toys compared to the soaring wrinkled wall behind them were clustered together by a long, corrugated building with a conveyor belt running out of each end. Their host spoke up for the first time since telling them his mind was full of holes, or whatever it was he said. Rattlesnake number 2. Rattlesnake number rattlesnake. Rattlesnake number 2. Sometimes known as the China Pit. He sounded like a tour guide who still enjoyed his job. Old number 2 was open in 51. And from 62 and so right through the 70s, the biggest open pit copper mine in the United States. maybe in the world. Then it played out and then opened it up again near year before last. They got some new technology that makes even the tailings valuable. Science, huh? Gosh. But there was nothing moving up now. Nothing moving up there now. Not that Peter could see, although it was a weekday, just a huddle of trucks by what was probably some kind of sorting mill and another truck, this one a pickup, parked off to the side of the gravel highway leading to the summit. The conveyors at the ends of the long metal building were stopped. The cop drove through the center of town, and as they passed beneath the blinker, Mary squeezed Peter's hand twice in rapid succession. He followed her gaze and saw 3 bikes in the middle of the street which crossed Main. They were about a block and a half down and had been set on their seats in a row, with their wheels sticking up. The wheels were turning like windmill blades in the gusty air. You put your bike up. She turned to look at him, her wet eyes wider than ever. Peter squeezed her hand again and made a shh sound. The cop signaled a left turn, pretty funny under the circumstances, and swung into a small, recently paved parking lot bordered on 3 sides by brick walls. Bright white lines were spray painted on the smooth and crackless asphalt. On the wall at the rear of the lot was a sign which read, "Municipal employees and municipal business only. Please respect this parking lot." Only in Nevada would somebody ask you to respect a parking lot, Peter thought. In New York, the sign would probably read, "Unauthorized vehicles will be stolen and their owners eaten." That is funny. There were 4 or 5 cars in the lot. One, a rusty old Ford estate wagon, was marked fire chief. There was another police car, in better shape than the fire chief's car, but not as new as the one their captor was driving. There was a single handicapped space in the lot. Officer Friendly parked in it. He turned off the engine and then just sat there for a moment or two, his head lowered, fingers tapping restlessly in the at the steering wheel, coming under his breath. To Peter it sounded like last train to Clarksville. "Don't kill us," Mary said suddenly in a trembling, eerie voice. "We'll do whatever you want, just please don't kill us." "Shut your quacking Jew mouth," the cop replied. He didn't raise his head, but he went on tapping at the wheel, with the tips of his sausage-sized fingers. "We're not Jews," Peter heard himself saying. His voice sounded not afraid, but querulous, angry. "We're, well, Presbyterians, I guess. What's this Jewish thing?" Mary looked at her husband, horrified, then back through the mesh to see how the cop was taking it. At first he said nothing, only sat there with his head down and his fingers tapping. Then he grabbed his hat, got out of the car. Peter bent down a little so he could watch the cop settle the hat on his head. The cop's shadow was still quad, but it was no longer puddles around his feet. Peter glanced at his watch and saw it was only a few minutes shy of 2:30. Less than a half an hour ago, the biggest question he and his wife had was what their accommodations for the night would be like. His only worry had been his strong suspicion that he was out rolades. Pop bent and opened the left rear door. "Please get out of the vehicle, folks," he said. They slid out, Peter first. They stood in the hot light, looking uncertainly up at the man in the khaki uniform and the sand brown belt and the peaked trooper-style hat. "We're going to walk around to the front of the municipal building," the cop said. "That'll be a left as you reach the sidewalk. And you look like Jews to me, both of you. You have those big noses which connote the Jewish aspect. Officer, Mary began. No, he said. Walk. Make your left. Don't try my patience. They walked, their footfalls on the fresh black tar seemed very loud. Peter kept thinking of what a little plastic bar on the dashboard of the cruiser. Oh, thinking of the bar. It's jiggling. Oh my good lord. Peter kept thinking of the little plastic bear on the dashboard of the cruiser. Jiggling head and painted eyes. Who had given it to the cop? Favorite niece, a daughter? Officer Friendly wasn't wearing a wedding ring. Peter had noticed that while watching the man's fingers tap against the steering wheel, but that he didn't mean he had never been married. And the idea that a woman married to this man might at some point seek a divorce did not strike Peter as in the least bit odd. All right, y'all. I know I've only gotten half an hour in today, but my eyes are bothering me. So I'm going to go lay down. And I will get back on here in a little bit and I will read some more. If I nap a little bit, my eyes will feel better. We're going to do. But I will be back in a bit. I will read some more when I get back. All right. Thank you for watching. Thank you for following. We have not even gotten into the police station yet. So we'll see what happens when we get in there. All right. Love y'all. And I'll see you later.